Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in to another of our summer talk show series, exploring resources all across the state. I am Stephanie from Michigan Alliance for Families, and we are excited to have Erin Diaz from Disability Rights Michigan with us today. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.
We are so excited you can join us. Before we dive into Disability Rights Michigan, you want to tell me a little bit about you?
Absolutely. So I have been with Disability Rights Michigan since before it was Disability Rights Michigan. We were MPAS until 2020 when we rebranded, but I've been working there since about 2015. And I've done education work since the beginning. We do a whole lot of other things disability related, but I've been on the education team the whole time. Prior to that, I was actually a teacher. I did a teaching program with a master's degree right out of undergrad. So I taught in South Los Angeles for 2 years, and then I also taught in Chicago for 2 years prior to going to law school. Um, and I use my teaching experience all the time in the work I do.
It has to be such useful experience as far as background. And I think that kind of answers my next question, which is what drew you to this work? How did you end up doing this work? I mean, it sounds like you were boots on the ground and were like, oh, I can fix this system. I need to do more.
So I actually always wanted to go to law school. So I knew that part of my life was going to happen. And then when I was in college, I decided right after school, I wanted to take a few years and not dive right into law school, but do a service program. So that's what took me to the teaching program. As a gen ed teacher, I knew I couldn't give the kids what they needed, and I needed more help. And I realized, hey, there's some laws that are supposed to be helping in this situation. I think I need to go to law school and look at that specifically. So it really helped guide my legal career and help me focus on what I wanted to do afterward. So since graduation, I had a fellowship program for the first 2 years when I was working with MPAS, now DRM, and then I was hired on full time in 2017. But it's been education in Michigan my whole legal career.
We're so glad you made that choice and are trying to impact some of those systems change pieces. Can you tell me more about Disability Rights Michigan and what you guys do?
Absolutely. So we are the federally mandated protection and advocacy system for Michigan. That means we protect and advocate on behalf of individuals with disabilities throughout the state. Our mission is empowering all to uphold the rights of people with disabilities. And our vision is that DRM envisions a world where human rights are protected and differences are celebrated.
And Erin, just in your description of what you do and what federal law it comes from, I understand why the name used to be MPAS. But that didn't give a lot of people a lot of information about what you guys do. So was that part of like the rebranding and thinking about Disability Rights Michigan, is that people were clearer on whose rights you're protecting and advocating for?
The P&A system, it's a whole system created through the DD Act. And there's one of us in every single state, including US territories. I often look and see if the Virgin Islands has an opening just to, take a little break in some warmer weather. But many of I call them sister organizations, have disability rights and then the state. And so it's very clear. What do we do? Disability rights. Instead of just we're protecting. Who are we protecting? What are we protecting? Disability rights was much clearer in terms of what we do and who we help.
And you said DD Act. Can you tell me what that is?
It's actually the protection advocacy for individuals with developmental disabilities. We say DD Act a lot. And that was from 1975. And Congress realized that there were individuals with developmental disabilities who needed protecting and advocating. And the idea was that the system was created throughout the country. Every state creates their own agency or designates an agency rather to serve that function to protect and advocate for individuals with developmental disabilities. And then as time has gone on, more grants have been created through different acts. Like we have Payee, which is protection and advocacy for individuals with mental illness. And then we have PAIR after that. And then we have PABS, which looks at Social Security. And then in 2018, we had the beneficiaries of representative payees, which is PABRP. And then we have PAVA, which is voting. And we have a TBI as well for those with traumatic brain injuries. And all of those grants come to us and we use them in different ways to protect and advocate for individuals with disabilities.
Do I have to pay you? Is there something that there's a cost to me? Is everything grant funded? How does that work? Where does the money come from?
We are primarily federally grant funded. We actually get a little bit of state funding for information and referral services, and then we take donations too. But if you call, our services are free. Our information and referral department is fantastic, and they are great first individuals to speak to give you information about your rights. And then after that, we have different teams with advocates and attorneys on them, depending on what the issue is and whether it's within our focus areas at that point in time. But all of our services are free because of all the grant funding we have. And actually, we also get a little bit of funding, through litigation. But any fees we get through litigation go back into the grant programs to keep the work we're doing.
Excellent. So when should I call?
You can call at any point in time when you have a question that's disability related. Or even if it's not like within our focus areas, you call in and we can take your information, give you information about your rights in that area, and then also refer you out to other agencies who might be able to help you. But as long as it's an issue and it's related to a disability, it's something we can assist with.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit more about focus areas. You've said it a couple of times. Where did those come from? How often do they change?
In order for us to use our resources most wisely, and actually through the grant funding, I believe as well, it's required. We set up focus areas. And those are looked at every single year. And they do change from time to time. Sometimes it's the same general focus areas with narrowing in terms of specific issues within those focus areas. And the way we determine those is through what types of issues we're seeing throughout the state and the nation. We look at research that we've done or other agencies have done within the state. We get feedback from individuals who've called in and the public in general. And then we talk to the team members we have because we're the ones who are getting the calls, and we can see what really systemic issues are going on that we think we could help impact. And then once we develop our focus areas, we take those, we have the Payee Advisory Council, and they have to approve those. Payee is the protection and advocacy for individuals with mental illness. They have to advise on the Payee, on the focus areas, and then we take those and we take them to the board. They advise, and then they ultimately approve those for the year. One of the focus areas is eliminating abuse and neglect. And the way we're focusing on that specifically is looking at ensuring individuals are not subjected to abuse and neglect or inappropriate or coercive treatment or restraint or seclusion. We're looking at individuals who are in psychiatric residential treatment facilities and state hospitals for that one, and also looking at individuals who are housed in prisons to ensure that individuals with disabilities there are free from abuse and neglect and inappropriate treatment. We have a focus area looking at voting rights and individuals with representative payees, as well as access to COVID recovery efforts. And then we have another focus area looking at integrative competitive employment, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later with the CAP program. And then we have a focus area on improving access to services. It's really important that individuals with disabilities are able to remain in the community. And in order to do that, you need to have access to services, whether it's assistive technology services or discharge planning supports, as well as looking a little bit at guardianships and unwarranted and unnecessarily restrictive guardianships. Another of our focus areas, which I work under almost primarily, is ensuring the right to a high quality education. And that's looking at ensuring that the Department of Education is exercising general supervision power. We look at push out, which is what we call just kids being invited to not be in school anymore, whether it's officially an expulsion or suspension or just being told to stay home. And then within that as well, we're looking at individuals in foster care and ensuring that they have appropriate educational services as well.
those educational pieces are a lot of where we wind up talking to each other or connecting with each other. Is that Michigan Alliance for Families, our focus is on special education. And we see those trends in our work as well, where we start to see things and are able to refer people to Disability Rights Michigan to see if it fits in with the focus areas. That big trend of push out, that big trend of changing discipline, mean, we've seen that change pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. Like Oxford really shifted that conversation. What are you guys seeing when you're looking at that focus area?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. We believe that everybody deserves to be safe in school, and that includes the individuals with disabilities as well. And ever since the Oxford situation, we've seen schools sending home kids, either again, long-term suspension, expulsion, for things that are perceived as threats, which we understand. We want to be cautious. We want to make sure everyone's safe, but excluding kids doesn't necessarily make anyone safer. And actually, I think that the studies support that. We want kids to be around pro-social environments and pro-social and peers to be able to see what pro-social behaviors look like. So it's concerning to see when schools are suspending or expelling kids because of things that are perceived as threats, which aren't actually threats. And there are ways to go about doing that to ensure that people get the supports they need and then they can stay in school. And that requires having individuals in the schools to understand how to do how to support those kids appropriately. At DRM, we still see a lot of restraint and seclusion, which is a concern for the education team. Even though the restraint and seclusion law was passed, we still see schools doing it unnecessarily or even misdocumenting it. And it all goes back to behavior supports, understanding behaviors, communication. How do we do, even if these are really big behaviors, there's a cause, and figuring out really what the cause is to be able to support the kiddo, to be able to support the teachers and the other kids in school too. We've also seen trauma as a big issue that concerns us. And schools still aren't fully equipped to address trauma and the behaviors resulting from it. And as a result, it leads to suspensions and expulsions. And ever since COVID, we've seen a lot of kids getting sent on virtual programming, which we found out that it's great that we can deliver instruction that way. And that still works really well for some kids, but it doesn't work for a lot of kids. And just because it's there doesn't mean it should be relied on, rather than, again, having kids in the school setting. We know from that experience, kids need to be in school. That's where they learn best. And that they're around their peers, and we need that socialization piece. That's how we learn to interact in society, right? We learn how to read and do math in school, but we also learn how to interact with each other. And that's such a big part of being in school. And you can't get that in the same way virtually, unfortunately. One of our other pieces that I've seen recently, and then we can move on, is a refusal to evaluate for special education services. When it's pretty clear there's something else going on here. And sometimes schools will evaluate, well, they'll refuse to evaluate for special education, but they'll give a 504 plan instead. And the 504 plan just doesn't cut it in those situations. 504 plans are appropriate sometimes, but often kids need something else. And if they need it, they should be getting it if they're eligible for an IEP.
At Michigan Alliance for Families, we encourage families to start with asking for a comprehensive educational evaluation, see what the right fit is. Because 504s are appropriate for some students and IEPs are appropriate for some students. That individualized education program that is under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So we spend a lot of time talking about like getting that right fit and getting your needs met and how to have that conversation. Erin, I heard you say general supervision about the Michigan Department of Education, and I don't think everybody knows what that means. Can you explain to me what general supervision is and what the responsibility of the Michigan Department of Education is?
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is the federal act that requires that children who are eligible for special education services actually get them. They get access to a free, appropriate public education. And there's funding tied along with that. It's a civil rights law that has funding to it, which is great. And the money in Michigan goes to the state, and then the state pushes it on forward. And by accepting that money, they have certain responsibilities. the Michigan Department of Education must ensure that the children are actually getting a free, appropriate public education. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to provide the free, appropriate public education. That's the local districts are agreeing to do that, but the state needs to ensure that it happens. And in order to do that, if there's a problem that they know about, they can order the districts to correct those concerns for the child and then for everyone else within the district.
Erin, you said one of the focus areas of the education group is on students who are currently experiencing or previously experienced foster care. That's one of the areas that we focus on Michigan Alliance for Families as well, where there is this all these additional hurdles that the data shows if you just have like one adult that cares and follows through, that's the one thing that makes a difference. Tell me a little bit more about what you guys are seeing in regards to youth in foster care and where we're trying to have impact there.
We at DRM see individuals in foster care as being some of the most vulnerable because they often don't have that adult, right? That's with them that can advocate on their behalf. And if they are an individual with a disability, which statistically they typically are, they're much more likely to have a disability. We have trauma backgrounds as well that can result in a disability. You have that right to FAPE, right? No matter where you are and how often you've been moved. And that can be really challenging. It can be challenging for schools to understand what were their services before, where are we now, and bouncing around so much. And then it's difficult for the student, especially when you get into high school and you're looking at, are your credits transferring? Well, each district gets to decide what counts as a credit. So we're interested in looking at ensuring that students, if you're in that class and you've worked on it, you're a few weeks short of getting that math credit. Well, what can we do to help you? And that's an area I think of, you can be really creative in how you solve that issue, but making sure that students who are there doing their work aren't getting penalized because they're in foster care. It's not like they chose to be in foster care. So the idea that they're getting the services they need and they're also getting the credits for that they've earned. So that way they can have even better outcomes, right? We know high school graduation and having that diploma is really important long term. So ensuring that you're getting the supports and services so you can, make progress in your goals, but also make progress towards that diploma if that's something you're working towards. That's important. And that's true for students who are highly mobile in general, whether it's foster care or whether it's somebody who's homeless or couch surfing, individuals who are migrant workers, right? Kids transfer back and forth from districts with that too. And it's important that those students are able to get an education and also earn those credits. And there are other laws. We talk a lot about, IDEA and 504, but like McKinney-Vento can cover you in certain instances too. So those are all areas if you're running into questions or concerns, give us a call and we can give you more information about that as we try and advocate for individuals who don't always have people to advocate for themselves.
You also have another one of my favorite resources that you guys keep on your website. I love the Students with Disabilities Advocates Guide. I love how it's split into chapters and topics and like has those big pieces in it. Can you tell me a little bit more about like where that came from and how often it is revised or looked at and a little bit of history there?
Advocates Guide was first developed in 1984 from some folks who worked at MPAS, now DRM at the time, or worked with them specifically. It was an attorney and an advocate, I believe. So we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of that guide this year, which is very exciting. It's been revised a whole host of times since then. When it was originally developed, it was reviewed by quite a few experts, including one of the authors of the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, MARS. And most recently, we did a full revision in 2020, and we're currently revising it right now.
I love the structure of this guide. I love that it's so easy to get to what's most current, the advocate tips, the letters. Like I think the sample letters are just huge for like having the resource that you're looking for on that one topic in one place. So I'm really glad you guys made that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I visit it quite frequently too, because I think it's just a great one-stop shop, and then you can dive into other areas if you need to, but it's a good summary piece to start.
We love it. Our regional parent mentors love it, and we love to share it with families also so that they have that additional resource to dive into and to start to grow their own advocacy even further. So thank you for making that.
Welcome. So glad to hear that.
That education piece we spend a lot of time focusing on, and part of that education piece is as our children with disabilities are growing up, they are transitioning into adulthood and navigating different systems that are outside of education. Disability Rights Michigan is involved in a lot of those different systems for adults. You have an employment group, you have some other supports that are in place. Can you tell me a little bit more about employment supports first and what you guys are doing in that area?
Employment team helps individuals with employment related needs. Go figure. But what that actually looks at is advice and advocacy relating to vocational rehabilitation services. A lot of people know about Michigan Rehabilitation Services, but it also includes BSBP, the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. The employment team provides information about employment related rights, under the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act, as well as the Michigan Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act. So the employment team also advises and advocates for beneficiaries of Social Security Disability Insurance, that's SSDI. We have lots of acronyms because these words just get so long. And so Supplemental Security Income, which is SSI. So beneficiaries of those can be employed, and the employment team helps look at barriers to employment, and they'll advise and advocate, and they'll look at work-related Social Security overpayments, and also connecting individuals with resources to help them understand the work incentives for Social Security.
Questions about Social Security um, as a self-advocate with a disability or as a family member of an individual with disability. Where should I start? Should I start with Disability Rights Michigan? Should I start with my Social Security office? Like, what's my best starting point to get more information?
Absolutely call us at any point in time. What one of the things I love about our agency is you call and you talk to a real person, an intake advocate, and then they will get a little bit of information from you so they can refer you to one of our other advocates on one of the teams. So in your case, you'd be wanting to speak to an employment team advocate. And so there's the advocate who will take the initial call and do intros, and dive a little deeper into your issue and determine, is this something in our focus area? Can we do a little bit more for you? Or can I just give you this information and this is all you need from us? Do I need to refer you out to this individual at the Social Security office? Is that where you need to go? Or is there another agency that can better help you in this situation? If you have an issue with MRS specifically, we run the CAP program, which stands for the Client Assistance. I guess that's redundant. It stands for the Client Assistance Program. So we run CAP. That's created under the Rehabilitation Act of 73. And then it was amended in the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, which was just 2014, I guess, 10 years ago now. But CAP is there to assist and advocate for individuals with disabilities in their relationships with MRS and BSBP. And then they'll advocate pursuing remedies and ensuring a protection advocacy for the rights under the Rehab Act.
Those acronyms that trick me like the ATM machine still hang me up. So I completely understand the CAP program, and I have a couple of those that fly out of my mouth, and I'm like, wait a second. I just did ATM machine. I know I'm not supposed to say that.
Absolutely.
So my child actually does have an open case with our local MRS counselor. And the counselor attended our IEP. We've been exploring programs with them. If we were to have an issue in the future, what should we do? Like, how do we get in touch with the CAP program? Is it that same intake? And like, when's the right time to reach out?
You can call the same intake. It's one number. You can reach anybody for those disability related issues at DRM. And then the initial call that you have, they'll figure out, okay, well, it's a CAP issue. We'll send it over to the employment team. That first call will take, general information, make sure we can contact you back, and then either transfer you immediately or you'll get a call back soon after with somebody from the employment team. Now, the type of assistance you get will really depend on, what your issue is and if it's something within our focus areas. You might be asked to do a few things before we would take on the case, depending on what the situation is. If you said you did have an open case, okay. Sometimes the first thing is, hey, make sure you call MRS, get your case opened. But from there, that's when we can step in and we can help, we can advocate or just give some advice on advocating.
We heard there are pre-employment transition services that are available.
Pre-employment transition services are provided through MRS, and it's part of the push with the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act. You do not need to have an open MRS case to access pre-ETS services, but they would be provided through your local MRS office, pushed into the school typically is how we would see them. So those agencies should be working together to figure out how to provide the pre-employment transition services. You're entitled to the services if you're an individual with a disability, regardless of an IEP or a 504 plan, right? You're entitled to those services. And MRS is supposed to be providing those, but making sure that MRS is working with your local district or ISD is going to be could be where the sticking point is. If you run into issues, definitely reach out to Disability Rights Michigan because our employment team is interested in looking into those cases.
We live in Michigan and we love our cars in Michigan, and we don't have a lot of great public transportation. There's some struggles to get around the state if you don't have an individual car. That is a huge hurdle that we hear about as adults are exiting public education where there has to be transportation provided. That's a hurdle to employment across the state is transportation. You guys have developed a new resource that is pretty awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
We have the vaccination project through DRM, and through that work, it actually highlighted the need even more so for us for significant systemic changes to advance health equity for Michigan's disability, which includes transportation. So it's not just employment, it's even just access to healthcare. And we realized that individuals needed a one-stop shop for those resources to address those public transportation needs. We created a site, which you can access if you go to the homepage. I think there's like a special link at the top right now because we're so excited about it still. But this helps travelers find public transit, know their rights, and helps them access community resources as well.
This is something that's so useful to so many people. There has not been like one spot where you could get this information. This has been a big hurdle like across the state of how do I find it? This made a big difference having this out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people don't realize that both federal and state law require that you must have transportation that's accessible for individuals with disability. And there are over 30 million public transit rides in 2021, according to the state's ridership report. So a lot of people are using public transportation. And my guess is a lot more will be using it if they know how to. And especially for individuals with disabilities, right? They rely on the public transportation, yet they face barriers, and that results into what you had said about employment, but also the healthcare access. Um, and when I was looking just recently at the site, it's got so much information, but what I really like is if you've never done public transportation before, it can be a little daunting. And there's an area where with really the definitions of different terms that are used. So you become familiar with like, what kind of a ride should I try and get? What's a flag stop? Things like that. Um, and if you look at the site, you can see there are various modes of transportation are listed. There's a map that you can look at and you can just click on and see what kinds of transportation is available. There's also a know your rights and then a frequently asked questions piece as well. But more importantly, there's a share your transit story. So if you have an experience, we want to hear about it, good or bad. We want to hear about what those experiences are so we can either add information if we need to, or see if there's an issue that we need to help address, or just celebrate that it's helping people.
I want to circle back to where this project rooted from. You said that you were doing work around vaccinations related to COVID. Like everything is so interconnected when we start to think about access and like we can't access this because of XYZ. Can you tell me a little bit about how this evolved?
So we have a grant, like we talked about through the vaccination program, and it's for COVID-related vaccinations, but also I think we're giving flu vaccinations as well now for individuals with disabilities. And through that, a lot of that process is really grassroots working in the community and building relationships way, and it's through the entire state. We represent the entire state, and so we're working through the entire state. And that demonstrated that there was a significant need for individuals. And that was more health related, but obviously the employment is part of it too, that they just can't access transportation. They can't get where they need to go. And from that, um, the idea of the transportation guide was born. And that's how we work throughout the agency. If we notice that there's an issue, it's not something that this team works on and then we're done. It's this team is working on it, but we see this issue that this team could be working on as well. So we try and, as much as possible, but refer from team to team, and also address issues that we see for individuals with disabilities, to be able to make the most impact in those individuals' lives.
Everyone starts thinking about me, thinking about my family, that we start to explore like more information about rights and processes and everything else because we care about our loved one and we see these problems. And then we grow as we learn more and we move in from that I voice to that we voice when we're thinking about more people and how to have impact. I think that being able to reach out and know that touch point if rights are being violated is so important for families in either voice, in the I voice or the we voice, either more information or possibly to impact change. I think that's something that's really hard as a parent is we're like, okay, this is broken. How do we start to fix it? Where do we even begin? And that, I mean, that's kind of what you guys do is say, okay, here are the trends and what needs more attention and how can we pay attention to it?
I think that's a great way to look at it. We keep track of, districts that we hear about repeatedly. We keep track of the types of issues. That's why we know restraint and seclusion is still a problem. We know kicking kids over to virtual learning is a problem because we're getting calls about that, and we keep track of it to try and figure out the trends. And when we have calls, and if it's something that we're working on, we're always looking to see, and we want to help our client. Absolutely. That's our number one. And we want to make sure we can make as much change as possible. We can look at the system as a whole to see if it's a fix. And is it a district fix or is it a statewide fix that we need to look at, to ensure that individuals with disabilities are getting, in the education context, getting that FAPE, right? Getting the supports and services they need to make progress, or just in general, their rights are protected.
There's a big misconception that I hear a lot that if you have a guardian, you can't vote.
If you have a guardian, you are still able to vote. And I encourage you to vote. It's your right.
So I guess I
I
dove
think
into a weird spot talking about voting, but
I love walking in and saying, "Hi, I'd like to use the VAT."
yes, the VET is to make sure that everyone with disabilities is able to exercise their right to vote.
Say, "Hi, can I use the voter assist terminal?" Knowing that they probably don't know how to do it. And let's try on me so that somebody doesn't actually have to deal with, it can be embarrassing if you're the one who's holding up a line, right? And it shouldn't be. This is your right to have access to voting, and privacy when you're voting, just like everyone else. And it's something that the the polling place should know how to do. And they do get training on, but obviously people forget. Or it doesn't work, right? It's broken. And again, it's like, okay, well, I have time. My job is okay with me coming in a little late because I'm voting. They think it's important to vote. But not everybody has that benefit that I have. So it is important to make sure we have access to voting. Everyone has that right? You're over 18, with certain exceptions. You should be able to vote and to exercise your right. So we have information online, and we also have, an advocate who works specifically on voting and know your rights. And there's information on our site about, identification, because that becomes an issue too. Like, oh, what kind of identification will you accept? Do you have to have identification on the day you show up to the polls? Can they turn you away? No, they can't turn you away. That's a common misconception. So if you have a question about, disability related voting, absolutely give us a call, and our advocate can give you some more information. But like I said, our website is phenomenal. That's just been redone, and it's got so much information on it. So again, if you're, it's 1 a.m. and you're like, I want to learn about voting rights, you can hit up our website, drmish.org, and see kind of some preliminary pieces.
You mentioned earlier something about representative payee services. I don't think people know what that is. I know that you mentioned it in the list of things. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes. So in 2018, the Strengthening Protections for Social Security Beneficiaries Act was passed, and that created the protection and advocacy for beneficiaries of with representative payees. That's PABRP. Um, and with that, DRM ensures that benefits are actually being managed appropriately. So if you have Social Security, disability insurance, or supplemental security income benefits, and you're not able to manage your own benefits, then you have what's called a representative payee. Um, and DRM actually does representative or rep payee reviews. And that looks like an in-depth interview with the rep payee, and it looks at the responsibilities and how the beneficiaries of the SSDI or SSI benefits are actually managed. So they would look at ensuring beneficiaries' current needs, like are they getting food and shelter and medical expenses? Are they getting some personal items? And are those needs met? Um, are you actually using the benefits for the beneficiary's needs rather than your own? Are you reporting into Social Security if there are any changes that would affect benefits? And then are you keeping those documents to actually kind of support your case, right? Ensuring that you have ledgers and bills and bank statements, like this is money coming in for the benefit of this individual. Am I using it appropriately for their needs? Can I prove that piece up? And that grant is actually administered by Social Security.
Explain to me what the care team does or what care team means.
Um, they are the community and institutional rights team. So, like I said, we have the education team and the employment team, we have the care team. So, what they do often, a big piece of the work that they do, being that they are institutional rights, is monitoring. Part of, I call the kind of the superpowers that we have as the PNA is their access authority, our access authority. And that can be access to records, but also access to places. And we can and do monitor state psychiatric facilities, state hospitals, state prisons, schools. We even monitor schools from time to time. And the care team is primarily in charge of piloting that piece of it.
So earlier in the year in my local area, there was some like investigative journalism on your rights within psychiatric facilities. And I saw Disability Rights Michigan was involved in like a panel discussion on that and involved in that investigation. Um, that would probably be the care team.
Absolutely. So if you're worried about rights of individuals who are in like a psychiatric hospital, families or friends, that's something that you could call us about too.
I think that's something that's really important when we are advocating for disability rights in general. I think we all end up in these silos where, like, I'm the parent of a child with this one disability and I'm going to advocate for this one disability. But educating ourselves and having more knowledge on lots of different disabilities and that what those rights look like really makes our voices more powerful and helps us be more informed in these conversations. That building our empathy and understanding of other human beings and what their rights are and where those gaps are really lets us start to impact change and see that bigger picture. So I think that a lot of people tuning in may have like a student that has an IEP and they're really thinking of like their 10-year-old and their autism educational eligibility, but thinking about other people with other disabilities and what those rights look like through the lifespan is part of what you guys are doing, and really important work.
Incredibly true. The intersectionality, I think, within the disability community, but also broader intersectionality, when you talk about it, groups that are not always represented, um, I think it's really important, right? The more voices working together, and it's going to affect many of us. I wish I could remember the statistic off the top of my head, but disability is a part of life.
CDC estimates that 1 in 4 in the United States has a disability, and it's the one minority group we can all join at any moment. That could
Exactly.
be tomorrow, it could be in 10 minutes. Um,
And the laws protect us even if we do have different needs. And I think it's important that we can work together, combine our voices to be able to make more change. So intersectionality is huge in that, and making sure that we're working together, crossing those lines of this type of issue, or we're the ones with autism, we're the ones with dyslexia. Well, let's work together to make a change that can positively affect all children or all students or all individuals, not just kids in school. Feel free to call. We have our advocates waiting. We also have an online form, which I didn't mention before. So if it's like 2 a.m., you can call, but nobody's gonna be answering that phone right then. So you can fill out that form online and you'll get a call back. Typically it's the next day. But pretty soon after, you would get a call back about the issue, and we'll have an advocate talk to you and figure out like what else is going on in that situation. Are there other people who are experiencing it as well? Have them call us too. The more information we can get about a specific issue, the more likely we are to be able to help with that issue, or at least give guidance. And it's helpful for us to know, because again, we are well connected with other individuals and other programming in the disability community world as well throughout Michigan. So if it's something that we can't help with, we can refer out, or we can talk to another agency and say, hey, here's a problem we're seeing. Is this something that y'all can work on, or that we need to work on to try and problem solve?
And thank you so much for spending some time with us today and helping make sense of all these different pieces. It sounds like there's a lot of balls in the air over there, and we appreciate all the hard work you're doing. Thank you so much for spending some time clarifying what Disability Rights Michigan does and when it's really important to contact them, either to get more information and an additional touch point, or that there may be a focus area there where there's more that can be pursued in that space.
Thank you for having me. We really appreciate all the work you all do at Michigan Alliance for Families, and I'm happy to spend some time explaining what we do here.